Welcome back to the Cage Rage podcast. This is Devin. That is Miguel Iterati, and we're back to cover the weekly news and to preview what we got going on in the world of mixed martial arts this coming week. The date was December 12th, 2014. It was the finale of The Ultimate Fighter Season 20, and it was a bout between Carla Esparza and Rose Namajunas, a young thug Rose Namajunas, for the inaugural women's strawweight title. Carla Esparza picks up a third-round submission victory over the then very young thug Rose Namajunas. And then flash forward a few months later to March of 2015. In her first title defense, she runs in to a Polish juggernaut, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, who finishes Esparza in the second round, goes on to win 5 straight title defenses over Jessica Penne, Valerie Letourneau, Claudia Gadelha, Karolina Kovacevic, and Jessica Andrade before running in to the aforementioned thug Rose Namajunas, where she gets a stunning L at the hands of Namajunas in Madison Square Garden to lose her strawweight title. And since then, this division has seen more fluctuation than just about any other division. Namajunas has it, gets one title defense over Joanna in a very close rematch, goes on from there to lose the belt in earlier this year against Jessica Andrade in the now infamous slam on her neck KO. And then Andrade here recently back in August loses the belt to now women's strawweight champion Weili Zhang of China. And now we have Joanna coming back down to this division, kind of like as her last stand, going against one of the more popular fighters of this division, a former Sports Illustrated swimsuit cover girl, Michelle the Karate Hottie Waterson, former Invicta standout, who's been kind of a journeyman, kind of a gatekeeper in this division, but is on the best roll of her career. And Miguel, with that little backdrop of this women's strawweight division that's only been in existence for about 5 years in the UFC, when I look at these two, I see two of the most notable names in the UFC right now. But I also see these girls as, I think that this is really their last push to potentially get back to the title or to get to a title fight for Michelle Waterson. But just like was so often is the case with the UFC, this fight's getting announced, getting prepared for. There's a lot of attention behind it, but it comes with some drama because this week we get hit with some tweets coming out from very reputable sources like Ariel Helwani saying right here that Saturday's UFC main event, Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Michelle Waterson, is in jeopardy. According to multiple sources, Jędrzejczyk informed the UFC over a week ago that she would not be able to make the strawweight limit of 116 pounds. Well, going on, an updated tweet from today, Ariel Helwani said, I am told Jędrzejczyk had a good workout this AM and does not want the fight to be canceled after it was made clear that Team Waterson was not interested in a catchweight. Joanna Jędrzejczyk has decided to do everything within reason to make 116. She'll be at open workouts later today. And then going on from here, we got a tweet here from Luke Thomas saying that imagine training for a particular fighter with specific skills and body type for weeks. By no fault of your own, they come to you last minute and say, fight her heavy now or her opposite soon. This is one of the areas where fighters having less leverage than boxers is glaring. And that was responding to a tweet from Aaron Bronstetter that says that Combat have updated the story and report that UFC has given Michelle Waterson 2 choices. Face Joanna this weekend with her weighing heavy at a catchweight or face Jessica Andrade at UFC 244. So now I get what Luke Thomas's tweet means, and we're going to bring Chad in. He's here. Let me bring Chad up on screen right here real quick. Let me see how I can handle this. That's about the best I can get this with where we're at. How you doing, Chad?
Good. How are you guys doing? It's nice to see you all again. Nice to be back.
It's nice to have you back. And just to, I don't know if you heard most of what my little monologue that I just went through.
I did.
So we got this situation right now where Joanna's apparently informed the UFC over a week ago that she cannot make weight. The UFC came to Michelle Waterson with this information. She's saying, I'm not going to fight her if she's heavy. And they're basically giving her two choices now. Okay, fight her heavy, or you can fight Jessica Andrade in a few weeks in Madison Square Garden on the undercard of the Masvidal-Diaz bout. And Luke Thomas is pointing out correctly that that's ridiculous. Those are two completely different styles and on way too short of notice. Sounds to me, and Ariel Awani's reporting that Waterson is going to do whatever she can to make the weight now, within reason, as he put out,
Right.
To make this fight happen now, and we all hope it does. But it looks to me like the ball is really in Michelle Waterson's court at this point, and I want to throw that off to you two. Get your opinion on that. In my opinion, this is too big of an opportunity at too big of a time for Michelle Waterson, even if Joanna comes in a little heavy, to throw this fight away just out of pure stubbornness. I say bank 20% of her purse and fight the fight anyway. What do you guys have to say? I'll send it off to Chad since he hasn't been with us for a while.
Hi, it's nice to be back, guys. Can you hear me okay? Am I coming through all right?
Oh, I hear you great.
Okay, great. So you guys know that I'm a big Joanna Jędrzejczyk fan from day one. She's kind of had a slide here. She can't quite find her weight anymore. She's kind of grown up. She also got some plastic surgery that might have something to do with a little bit of her weight change too. I don't know how much that affects someone, but what I would say is I think that she's a much better fight than is Andrade. But what do you think about the idea of missing out on what I think is going to wind up being enormous with Diaz, the Diaz fight and the BMF title as it's been called?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say this to me is a no-brainer. I take the title shot, and Luke Thomas. With all due respect to Luke Thomas, yeah, you've been preparing for a fighter with a different set of skills.
Not to cut you off, but let's keep in mind that Andrade is not the champion anymore. Weili Zhang is the champion.
Oh yeah, I apologize, but I think it brings you a lot closer to a title shot than you would have been even after a Joanna mix because of the interplay with the Chinese fighter and Andrade. It puts you in the neighborhood and gets you on a much higher profile card. With all due respect to Luke Thomas, yeah, the fighters are different, and there is a lot of that preparation there. But, there is also there's no gi. The stand-up game is pretty much going to be – in other words, the fighters are all more or less about 80 to 90% with the same skill sets anyway. So I think you take the higher profile fight. I don't think it makes that much of a difference. Joanna, may be good to go here if the mental pressure is, gets to her and stuff, and maybe fighting Andrade on her bounce back rather is not a good idea strategically. So that's something the camp has to look at. But I would opt for the high. If all things considered, the Joanne fight's already a mess, and then I'm not worrying too much about my opponent if I was Waterson, but there's the overall what are they asking here? They're asking a fighter to upset. Basically we don't care about the weight classes anymore because she can't make the weight, so right. You move up. So but then she's going in and they're reporting on her workouts and stuff. I just again, barring a tragedy, this stuff is just going to go on. But every time this stuff happens, the whole world of mixed martial arts should just sit there and cringe over what they're asking a fighter to do here, or what a fighter is thinking of intending to do here. If she knew 10 days out she wasn't going to make the weight, that could mean a whole bunch of things.
I want to throw another potential possibility to both you guys, because Joanna actually made a tweet today with her sweating, and she had little winking emojis going on. We have known for a long time that Joanna Jędrzejczyk is very into using head games. What is the potential of this? If she's perfectly fine making the weight, but she's just kind of trying to get Michelle Waterson a little bit flustered for this Friday, a little bit, starting to look past this fight, weigh her possibilities. Is Michelle Waterson, by saying, I'm not going to take this fight if you don't make weight, is that her kind of giving those head games right back to Joanna? Where Joanna was trying to throw that out there, just trying to see, okay, how's she going to react to this? Because I might want to come in a little bit overweight. And then Michelle's kind of playing those games back, like, no, you don't make weight, I don't fight. Period. I'm walking away from it. So I could see this being just kind of head games going back and forth because Michelle, Joanna and Jacek has been known to have a tough weight cut. She moved up to 125 at one point, but she's known about this fight for a long time, and she's always been a consummate professional. I'm wondering how much of this could potentially be head games going back and forth right now, and that they're both going to end up stepping on the scale at 116, 115, and the fight will go on. What's your thoughts on that, Chad?
I get it, and I guess that's a possibility. I don't see that as being what's really going on here. I think the problem is that Joanna has grown up, and as she's grown up, she's physically grown, and when she started, she was kind of a kid who was just out there, beating the brakes off of people, and then she got beat a couple of times, and she realized, this weight cut really hurts me, makes my chin weak. I'm slower. I don't have the gas that I had before, and I'm getting older, and I want to get everything out of this game while I can. So sure, she could be trying just to play head games. In the same tone, they could be trying to sell the fight because they're trying to save the weight class. So there's a lot of different things that could be going on, and I'm never one to run away from a conspiracy theory, but in this one, I just don't think so. I think Joanna is just finally in a position in her life where she's in that middle area where she's not big enough to fight the girls above her, and she's too big to make the weight below. And that's unfortunate. And so we have catch weights. And I think we need to start looking at, maybe people need to complain about the idea that the UFC they're not sticking with their weights.
And real quick, I do want to make a little bit of comment because I didn't comment on last time, is I will disagree a little bit about it would be a huge opportunity for her to go fight in Madison Square Garden under one of the biggest cards of the year. But Michelle Waterson has been known to struggle with certain styles. And you're talking about a younger, in her prime, coming off a very hard loss in China where she just lost her belt. Jessica Andrade, who's going to be coming in very motivated and would almost certainly put a lot of pressure on Michelle Waterson. Andrade just fought as high as 135 pounds. She fought Raquel Pennington in the UFC at 135 pounds. She's a massive 115. Michelle Waterson, I keep wanting to say Michelle Obama. I guess that just runs off the tongue when I say Michelle. But Michelle Waterson, she is known as the karate hottie. That's her style. She likes to strike.
Sure.
Joanna really is a very good matchup for her at this cream of the crop top level people at 115 pounds. She's been very motivated for this fight. She comes from Greg Jackson's. They're master game planners for specific styles. Joanna and Jacek, you touched on that a little bit, Chad, that she's at a point in her life right now where I really think this is both of their last runs. I think that one of them getting set back, it's going to be really hard for them to climb back up that rank to a potential title fight when you got people like Weili Zhang now and Tatiana Suarez and Rose Namajunas and all these elite fighters still coming up, even in the lower part of the top 15 at women's strawweight. So this is a very important fight for both of them. I would capitalize right now on the name value of the former champion Joanna. That's personally what I would advise, but I see that you guys see it a little bit different, that the Andrade bout, she might want to run with that offer even on a short notice.
That's okay. You're allowed to defer. You're just
wrong.
No, I'm just kidding. but what I want to point out here is, just to wrap up on the conspiracy theory angle, is Joanna above that sort of thing, or is she capable of this sort of thing? Yeah, absolutely. I think she's a cerebral fighter, and this total package thing here. What I think is a clear sign that's not a conspiracy theory in this case, though, is the UFC. I mean, it doesn't strike anybody else as weird that a week in advance or 10, whatever in advance, she's like, yeah, I'm not going to make the weight. What is she, 190 pounds now? I mean, I could tell you, on the men's side, it's different with experience and things like that. But I can tell you people 30, 35 pounds off weight the week of the fight, and they're not sweating it. because they've got their plan. They know how to do it. So she should have a game plan, know how to do it. For her to win, maybe, like I said, I don't know all the factors. Maybe, something as simple as her menstruation hits that day or that week.
Yeah,
and
which matters a lot.
There's water retention, things like that. Not being a doctor, but we'll leave it at that. So maybe that's a factor, and you don't know all the factors. But to me, saying, hey, a week in advance, I'm not going to make weight, that's a bad sign. One way or another, the UFC should see if it's a mind game and look at it seriously. And if it's a mind game, then how well is it executed to say, hey, in a week, hey, I'm not going to make the weight? It's like, yeah, I would do exactly what Waterson did. It's like, yeah, then I'm not going to fight. Are you even going to try it? What's the deal? So the UFC giving her an option of another fight and stuff like that means that they're really not in control of the situation. And but if it was a mind game, I think that they may have been involved. It just seems weird. I would go to Joanna and go, look, are you serious? You're not going to make it. What's the deal? What's going on? There's got to be a little bit more to it than we're being told. So I don't think it's a mind game. I think it's another disaster for this weight cutting stuff where nobody can look good.
The moment that they pulled IVs out and things like that, they needed to change things up completely rather than just say, look, you're no longer allowed to use an IV to rehydrate after you cut weight. And that's somehow going to fix things. That's not how that works. What happens instead is that you either get fighters that don't make weight, and so the fight, can't technically be recognized for what it is. Or on the other hand, you get a fighter that isn't hydrated properly. You don't get a good performance out of them, and that's bad. So I think the whole weight cutting thing needs to be overhauled, personally. I think it should be that you should be within 10 pounds of your weigh-in weight right before you step in the cage. And I know there are some formalities to that would be difficult, but it seems like that's really a good way to solve the problem. Because there's not enough, let's face it, there's not enough competition to open up another weight class in between there right now.
Well, and I don't like the idea of going to 5 pound separation between weight classes just because I believe
that bottom of the spectrum with the weight classes.
Yeah, I like the 10 pound separation. But when it comes to revamping the whole weight cutting process, I think the biggest problem that a lot of people have with that is there's still going to be people that would try to cut corners on that. And on top of that, they would have to basically take 6 months off of all competition in the UFC because it would completely revamp all their weight classes. All the fighters would be in different weight classes. It would take so much time to really sort that out because I don't think there'd be a single champion that would even be able to compete in those weight classes anymore at that point because they cut so much weight.
You're right there.
Maybe somebody like Mighty Mouse Johnson back in his day. But I do want to run something by you, though, also is they also offered her potentially this is Michelle Waterson, that if Joanna falls out, there's another bout that's on this main card. Mackenzie Dern is returning, and she's fighting Amanda Ribas. These are both two very talented 26-year-old young strawweights. They offered her Mackenzie Dern or Amanda Ribas, whichever one she wanted. She didn't want either one of them. She said that's not what she's wanted to do. It would be a big step backwards against talented young fighters. I do want to talk a little bit about Mackenzie Dern, though. She's coming back. She just had a baby 5 or 6 months ago. I think back in like June, so it might even be less than that, more like 4 months ago.
Man.
The UFC didn't even want her to take this fight. She's apparently passed all her medicals. She's getting ready to fight, but she is a black belt in jiu-jitsu, but she actually got kicked out of the MMA lab in Arizona last year. There's a lot of controversy over that, over her partying, not taking stuff seriously. Then she gets pregnant, has a kid. She's coming back. She's got a very tough fight this weekend. I'm interested in that. I'm also interested in hearing you guys' thoughts on Kron Gracie taking on Cub Swanson. And Cub Swanson, and you want to talk about a last stand this weekend. This is about as last stand as it gets. He's been on a bad skid for a long time. And Kron Gracie, Miguel's pointed out that he's really a flashback to a past era of where we've actually got a true specialist that's in our midst when it comes to somebody like Kron Gracie. Do either one of you guys want to give a comment on either one of those fights?
Go ahead, Miguel.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fight night, and it's ESPN Plus, so they're headlining with, the former champion Joanna. I consider it a lukewarm card. Kron is probably the most interesting name on the card, top to bottom. Anyway, just because of the pedigree, you're in a situation there where, with the jiu-jitsu, the family name, the real ties to the family name, not, cousins or anything like that and things of that nature. So you're in a situation here where, you invoke the legend and you get to talk about a little bit about history and stuff like that. He's been around, for a little bit of time now. He's in his 30s, and he's going to be more diversified than his father. And we saw him, but his father is the absolute legend of the last generation, right? So he's got a little bit of that mystique. I think a lot of that is washed away a little bit, because the name, has been saturated, and there have been losses. There, not every Gracie's got a perfect record, right? But Kron's that hope. He's the guy that might bring back that Gracie legend and stuff like that. We'll see. In the case of Cub Swanson, I think he's going to be okay in this situation. Unfortunately for Cub, Cub. He's going to go down in history, I think, as an A- fighter, where there was a little bit of a tier above him that he could give hell to, but he was never able to break through. So this match kind of is about, can Kron start to call himself an A-level fighter at this point? He's only 5-0, but I think Cub still will be a serviceable doorman for this. But I don't know that he presents enough to worry Kron Gracie right now.
I do think that calling him A- is even generous, and I don't mean to be insulting to
I do too.
I don't mean to be insulting to Cub Swanson because he's been around since the WEC days, but he has been basically if you open up a dictionary and look at featherweight journeyman, you're going to get Cub Swanson's going to be the first name you're going to find. But when you look at, he's 4-6 in his last 10 fights on a 4-fight losing streak. But when you look at who he's lost to, Shane Burgos, Renato Moicano, Frankie Edgar, Brian Ortega, Max Holloway, and Frankie Edgar are his last 6 losses. Those are every one of those guys are ranked, and a couple of them are former champions. In his last, he is a journeyman who's on his way out, clearly, but he's still good enough to go in there and be a test for somebody like Kron Gracie, who's only got 5 MMA fights, 1 fight in the UFC. Is he well-rounded enough in his MMA game to compete with ranked and legit MMA fighters inside the UFC? So I think that he's a good benchmark for what we can see at Kron Gracie. If he's able to go in there and take Cub Swanson down, submit him in the first or second round, just dominate him in the grappling, we know we got something special with Kron Gracie, and we know he's a great jiu-jitsu practitioner, but sometimes we've seen that not really translate and transition well into mixed martial arts. So with that, Chad, what do you have to say about just the Gracies in general, Kron coming in? Is he going to be able to, is him being just a throwback specialist fighter, is that outdated? Is that impossible to really be that in such an era of great athletes and just well-rounded mixed martial arts games? Is that going to be able to compete even against a Cub Swanson?
No, the one name I have for that is Ryan Hall. And so when you look at Ryan Hall, there's a guy who can go in and win any fight at any time against anyone just because he's Ryan Hall and he has that one-trick pony. It's a one-trick pony, but stop the trick, right? The thing that this really reminds me a lot of is back when Jacare first came around. And, Jacare, his grappling's great. We know that. But can he fight somebody who he can't take down? Can he win the fight if he can't get it to the ground? And that's really what we're asking about Kron right now. Can he win a fight if he can't take Cub down? Now, the thing about Cub that I think hurts him more than anything else is what makes him popular and special and keeps him in a contract all the time. And that's that he doesn't necessarily go out with a real game plan. He's a guy who goes out and swings for the fences. He fights super hard. He can hit like steel. and he wins or loses. He's either on his shield or with it, and and you've seen a lot of on his shield here lately, definitely, which means that people have adapted to that, and they're not willing to go out and have the Clay Guidas, swinging matches that two guys stand there and punch each other. A la what? The Don Fry fights back in Pride when they exchanged punches in the corner and whatever. You don't see that stuff anymore because, like you said, Greg Jackson, the ultimate game planner, and I don't think Cub cares about a game plan, whereas Kron's going to come in with a very strict, very stiff game plan. And so he's either going to win by decision or he's going to submit him. And I'd say that's what happens in that. And maybe that's time for Cub to leave.
And I'm very interested in seeing it. It might end up turning out to be the main event. We're not going to sit and break down every one of these cards this weekend, but I do want to briefly go over them. And then I've got some questions for both you guys. You got the PFL Friday night with its PFL 2019 playoff. It's got the women's lightweight semifinal matchups between Kayla Harrison, who's got a lot of attention garnered on her. She's taking on Gina Fabian, and Sarah Kaufman's taking on Larissa Pacheco. And you've also got the four quarterfinals in the welterweight division for the men in the PFL. And then also this weekend, you got Bellator going over into Europe, into Milan, Italy, and they've got a 2-in-1 fight card is really what they do. What they do is they have a DAZN card, and they do one for European audiences. But the DAZN card is headlined by Rafael Carvalho taking on Vadim Nebkov, and the Europe card is headlined by none other than Melvin Manhoff, who's still doing it into his 40s. Also this weekend, and this is why I'm scanning through these, is there's such a big weekend in mixed martial arts, and we're going to touch on this. One Championship has its century show. It's a 100th show, which has a part 1 and a part 2. Part 1 sees the women's atomweight title between Angela Lee and Jingnan Zhang, and the flyweight Grand Prix final between Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson and Danny Kingog. And then over in the part 2, you've got a heavyweight title between Onglong Zhang and Brandon Vera, and Bibiano Fernandez and Kevin Billington for the bantamweight title. What I want to talk to you guys about is, it's no secret the UFC is still dominating mixed martial arts, but what we're seeing now on any given weekend, we're actually starting to see more competition coming in. Yep. I want you guys to assess what we've seen this year, because at the beginning of the year, we had these conversations a lot, all three of us. We had a lot of conversations about Bellator and ONE, and at the beginning of the year, we were forecasting that by the end of 2019, we were going to see more of an East versus West in the MMA world, that a lot of the talent was either going to be going to ONE Championship or it was going to be going to the UFC, obviously, and that Bellator was going to kind of phase out. I don't know about you guys, but we haven't really seen that. I don't feel like ONE Championship's had a great year at all, and I feel like this has been the best year Bellator's ever had. And there's still some issues with Bellator, and we've touched on them quite often. I do like this PFL format, though. I do think it's a really good way to get new talent to come in. I thought there was a possibility Chris Cyborg was going to sign with them. But I do like they have a league, they get points, then they go into this playoff, they set up this Grand Prix, and at the end of the year, they crown 2 champions, give them each $1 million. I like that format. I think there's going to be a lot of younger talent who's going to be wanting exposure to get themselves into Bellator or UFC or ONE that is going to want to go into PFL. I think it's a good market. They've got a good TV deal with ESPN and stuff. I like that there's this diversity now where we have more talent ending up in good spots on good streaming packages, good cable packages. But I just want your guys. I don't want to cover each one of those cards. The casual fan doesn't really care anyway about these. I mean, Mighty Mouse Johnson's a good story, but he's fought twice this year, and I'm almost guaranteeing that most fans in the States couldn't tell you the people he fought. But I do want just to get you guys to assess what's going on with these promotions, because that's what you guys have a history in, is promoting and analyzing promotions. What are you seeing out of ONE? What are you seeing out of Bellator? What are you seeing out of the PFL? And how far behind are they right now from the UFC? And which one's making gradual moves that you like, which one's not? I'm going to hand it off to you, Chad. And I threw a lot there, but I think you understand where I'm getting at with this.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great question, and it's an awesome subject. I think really what you're saying, what we're seeing is that we're seeing Bellator is now Legends. And so Bellator is taking over a show that at one point could have been called Legends 10, 15 years ago, where you took guys that were, past their prime and you let them fight each other, and you do it in a different country so they can take steroids and they can look great and they can go in and they can have competitive fights and maybe even kind of have some sort of agreement on what they will or won't do. Not necessarily staged fights, but, look, we'll stand up and fight and we'll make this an exciting fight so that we all get paid and that we can continue to do this. That wasn't all that unusual in the old days for people. I mean, it happened. I'll put it that way. I think Bellator has accidentally hung around long enough to make the right moves. PFL reminds me of World Series of Fighting. And so, when you say PFL, I go World Series of Fighting, and, they had the teams and all that stuff. So I know this a little different, but it did give a lot of people exposure, and you're right. So it allows your common MMA fan to see something in a different format, and maybe one of them catches fire. We talked about bare knuckle fighting a couple of different times. Maybe that catches fire, maybe it doesn't. I think this is a period of throw it against the wall and see what sticks with the others. I think Bellator is firmly entrenched in the idea that we're going to take every legend we can get and every name that we can build on. We're going to build on them, and we're going to build on them wherever we go.
See, and that was my main criticism of Bellator, and they're still doing that because we're even going to cover a fight that was announced this week that is exactly just that, this Legends thing with Bellator, that they're taking these old legends and repackaging them and putting them against each other, or just taking UFC rejects that were contenders but never champs like Ryan Bader, and then repackaging them as they're the pound for pound best fighter on the planet. The one thing that Bellator has done, I think, really good this year that made leaps and bounds, as I've said forever, they need more organic in-house talent. And I can't wait for the Douglas Lima Roy McDonald rematch. Pitbull Ferreira, I think, is an awesome fighter. They got Kyoji Horiguchi this year. They got an undefeated champion with the guy that just beat Musasi, which his name's slipping me right now. Miguel, and I like what you said about the PFL, that it's a way for the casual fan to see MMA in a little different way. Miguel, what's your thoughts on all this?
I don't know. I think that if you expand your horizons a little bit, or if you look at it from a truly international perspective, the only company that's got a shot at the UFC or competing with them is one.
Agreed.
Bellator is continuing to be second fiddle. They seem to be happy with that. They have made some strides in bringing up homegrown talent, as you pointed out. But the problem with it is, in and of themselves, they market the legends first, and that is, damaging to their homegrown talent. They can't really get away with, bringing in the legends, putting them at the top of the card, and giving you title fights and things like that. Then again, they've expanded, but they don't have the real solution for all that, which is, and they don't seem to be heading towards the solution, which is a weekly calendar where they actually have fights every week, and they can offer fights on a schedule to their fighters. Now, one is approaching that. Now, one at the very beginning did their normal shows and things like that, a show a month, and then, they ramp up and things like that. But if you look at their schedule from now till the end of the year, they've got 3 shows in November, 5 shows in December, that sort of stuff planned. So now they've got a roster tantamount. Now, one thing I don't think hitting the Asian markets that they're going to be able to ever do is, Brandon Veer is alone, basically, and they can bring in Russians and things in the heavyweight division, the light heavyweight division. But if you look at from middleweight down, one's the most threatening company. They have some talent. I think the fact is that they came out and got Demetrius Johnson and Eddie Alvarez. With Alvarez, you're not really going wrong because he's very marketable and very, much a fighter you can put in with a very diversified cast of people, and he'll fight anybody, and he's a top-notch guy. But they also got Demetrius Johnson, which happens to be the number one pound-for-pound guy in the world. If you follow rosters and roster values and who's good and who's not and stuff like that, that was the reason one did it. They wanted Demetrius Johnson to be working with their company where their weight classes and stuff, and they're able to get him very diversified competition, something the UFC was never able to do or never wanted to do, right?
See,
so their capability of doing that and doing that on the schedule, on the calendar, at a weight class where the UFC's weak, they already have the best flyweights in the world over there. That creep that up. Some of the other weight classes, Bibiano Fernandez is a very good fighter. They still have Shinya Aoki. Aoki is a very talented fighter, never made got into the UFC and stuff like that. I would rather watch one than Bellator. That's just my opinion.
Oh, definitely.
Another factor of it is that they have different rules, and that is an adjustment for MMA fans who are used to the unified rules at this point and stuff like that. But it adds a little bit of an edge to the fights, and it makes things a little bit different. They allow kicks to a defensive opponent when they're down, and there are a couple of other little differences and things that I appreciate. So I think one is the one company there that hopefully, 30 years down the line, they're still there. I don't see that with any of the other companies.
See, the just to have a little opposition between us again here is my issue with one is I think you're right that one will be the company, if any, that can compete with the UFC, but that's just basically because the marketing and the money is there for them. Because when you look at their roster, we've seen this with Asian companies basically since the fall of Pride, where they have these gigantic spectacles. Risen's a fantastic spectacle. Sure. Risen has Kyoji Horiguchi, who's one of the best fighters in the world. But they market it really well. They promote it really well. They have the fireworks. They have the huge stage. They have all that. But then when you look at their roster, it's not that. I mean, when I think of, fighters that are not in the UFC that are the best, I'm thinking Gegard Mousasi. I'm thinking Pitbull Ferreira. I mean, obviously I am thinking Kyoji Horiguchi, but he's the champion in Bellator too, and in Rizin, not one. The best fighter that they have over there in one, without a doubt, obviously, is Mighty Mouse Johnson, but that came from the UFC. And I think that we would all three agree we'd really rather see him back in the UFC because I would love to see a trilogy fight with Cejudo.
And me too.
I think that's the problem is that their roster is, unless you've been following it from an international perspective, it all is, fighters that we're not familiar with. But I think one's put in a lot of work, and I think when you're talking about like fighters from the Philippines, I think now they have a core of guys that have been training, 5-10 years in MMA in the Philippines, and that makes a big difference because they're no longer crossing people over. They put in that level of work. And the fact is it reminds me of an old comedy routine, not to go too far off subject, that rest in peace, Patrice O'Neill. He was kind of, an offensive guy, but he said, he summed it up by the joke is something about Chinese people. And, and he's not talking about Chinese people from China. He's talking about Chinese people from all the other countries Chinese people come from. That's the point is they're not all Chinese people, right? But that diversification doesn't mean that they're not finding excellent fighters from. They use Russia and the Kyrgyzstans and Kazakhstans and things like that. We've seen those fighters impacting in the UFC. They have certain parts of their roster, and that's the Yakov, the guy who almost killed Eddie Alvarez, for example, that they're also getting from there. The Asian countries, they've got the lower weight classes, some of those guys up against some of the UFC's talent. No problem, especially at 125, 135. And I think that's going to continue. I think they also have Matt Hume. Maybe I'm a Matt Hume fanboy, but I think Hume is going to be a guy that's developing precisely the stuff I'm talking about. So when it comes down to it, they're fighters from Burma. Who's scouting Burma? You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like they scouted Burma. They found a guy that had emigrated to Washington State. He prepared for MMA, turned out to be good. And boom, from there, Now they have access to a different market. We were seeing, kickboxing from Burma come out on some of ONE's outlets and things like that. That's all stuff, that's UFC level stuff. That's UFC level context. Bellator is still stuck, giving me kickboxing shows in Italy because the Italians happen to have given them, site fees to show up there and do shows every once in a while.
Right.
They've also made inroads in Ireland and things like that. But once again, they're reacting, It's like, Conor McGregor, we should do a show in Ireland, It's like nothing Bellator does excites me the way some of ONE's things excite me. And don't sleep on the rules. I actually do think that the rules are better. So
yeah, I do want to throw something at you real quick, Chad, because I don't want to make this a political conversation at all because it'll take us down a rabbit trail and we got other things to talk about.
Yeah.
But you've been talking about the globalization of the UFC for a while, and it's fitting to talk about this right now because we're talking about ONE FC and we've got a big strawweight bout that we've all got our fingers crossed hoping will happen this weekend. Jessica Andrade wins the belt. Immediately, people are wondering who she's going to fight next. There was talks of Rose Namajunas rematch, Joanna, Tatiana Suarez, even Michelle Waterson's name was brought up. Nobody saw Weili Zhang coming.
Nope.
But nobody was really paying attention to the roster. They go and make that fight on ESPN Plus, not even a pay-per-view, with that being the headlining fight with Weili Zhang in mainland China because they wanted a China star as they're moving to that market. And Weili Zhang obviously goes in there, and she's probably the biggest star in Asia right now. She's a monster star over there, and they're going to be back with her as a headliner in the future, especially if she keeps winning. But we also just saw this week in the news where a Houston Rockets, employee comes out and makes a comment about the Hong Kong protest, and the NBA literally apologized on behalf of China because they're really looking at doing shows and stuff in that market. You have China expanding so much as a market. I think if with ONE having the money that it has, I think we are going to see a lot more Asia development. We know that the UFC just created its performance institute there. They moved a performance institute there that's, I guess, just massive, that they're trying to look up for new talent. As Miguel was just talking about fighters from the Philippines and Japan and China. There's going to be a lot more development of a lot of new talent coming up from that area. I do think that the UFC, unlike Bellator, is going to have the resources to actually go into that market and try to compete rather than just, okay, we're West, you're East, and we're just going to be fine with that. No, the UFC is going to want to go in there and compete with ONE on their own turf. And I think they're going to get a lot of that good talent. And I think that until a company, whether it's Bellator in the States or ONE in the East or whatever, is able to get some of the better talent to where I've said it forever, we will never have a legit competitor with the UFC until a promotion has multiple champions that the casual fan is clinging to see fight the UFC champions.
Yep.
At that point, we have a legit talent. Right now, we don't have that. Chad, I know I threw a lot out there right there about the development of China as a market, the UFC going in there. Clearly, other sports are moving into China. What's your thoughts on all that? Because you've been saying this for a while.
Okay, so first of all, I've probably told this story 1,000 times, but Ma Bell went to China and they built an infrastructure so that everybody could buy a phone in China. And everybody thought they were crazy. And they said, no one can afford a phone in China. And they said, yeah, but if we sell 1 billion phones at $1 a piece, we just made $1 billion. And so, that was the idea behind China. There are 1 billion people in China. That's not the rest of Asia. That's just China. And so, and so, what's that?
They're closer to 2 billion.
Yeah, they're like 1.8 now or something, right? So you put all of Asia into that, and let's face it, ONE's not big enough to hold all of that. And I think what we'll wind up seeing, this is a stretch, and this is just a thought. Now I could be totally wrong. I think ONE is the WEC of Asia, and I think that the UFC will figure out a way to envelop ONE into their standings, and eventually ONE will be part of the UFC. I think that's probably what that goes towards, just because it makes good business sense. So they have a lot of Asian fighters. They can have a UFC Asia. They can have a UFC America, which would be Canada, America, and South America and Central America. So the whole Americas would be a UFC, and then they could do a UFC Europe. And then at the end of this, you've got three different continental champions. And maybe you bring Australia and New Zealand and things into the European thing or into the Asian thing. I don't know, whatever's easiest. But I think that's kind of where we're heading. I could be totally wrong, but all the cards line up for it, and the money's there. And so if the money's there because of demand, and there's definitely demand. I mean, we saw that when Andrade got beat. That place was absolutely slam packed. And even if they're selling tickets at $20 a ticket rather than a $3,000 ticket to sit in the front seat, which isn't true anymore of China, by the way, they have a pretty awesome economy. But even if they have so many people that they're guaranteed to be able to sell out, and they could do it week after week after week after week, and we would never even hear about it. So I think that ties into my whole global conspiracy of the UFC eventually taking over. And we've seen this in MMA from day one. You let other people build the market, and then you go in and you take the market over, and that happens all the time. And if you don't have the legs to carry it, you don't have a way to compete with it. So I think that's what's happening.
And the more I see of this kind of stuff, the more I think you might be right, Chad. Moving on, because we're going to touch on some other of these little headlines that we got going on here. Speaking of potential global superstars, right here's the headline from Middle Easy. Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa rumored for clash in March. And we covered in depth on our recap, Miguel, Saturday night. We talked all about we've been covering it, Chad. We've been talking about all the hype between Adesanya and Jones, how that's eventually the end game. They've talked about Rumble in the Jungle. We've talked about Adesanya being a Nigerian-born man and the potential of them going to Africa. He's talked about Raider Stadium in 2021 with him and Jones. We know that they got a market down in Oceana now where they just did 60,000 people with him headlining. He comes out looking like Michael Jackson in the walkout, just gravitating this attention toward him and then going back in and backing it up. And now, unlike one of my big concerns that I talked a lot to Miguel about was my fear with Adesanya becoming champion is that we're going to have another division that's going to be held up by a champion that we're not going to really know who he's fighting next, because it's going to be the Conor McGregor syndrome that we're not going to know who's going to happen. He's not doing that. Right after he won this, he calls out the number one contender, who's not as big of a name as some of the other people in his division, but is definitely the number one contender. He looks right at Paulo Costa in the front row and says, I want to fight that overblown up Ricky Martin looking dude down there, Paulo Costa. And now they're targeting this for March. This kid's fought 7 fights in a year and a half and became UFC champion. Now he's wanting his first title defense in 5 months against a very dangerous opponent.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on this, Miguel? Because we did kind of predict that this was probably where they were going to go. And we'll briefly, because we covered so much of this, we talked for 30 minutes about just Adesanya and his star power now, and then I'll send it off to Chad to get some comments from him. But what's your thoughts on this potential for March?
Yeah, they announced it. They're talking about it. Let's just see and make it happen. Let's not get derailed. Like you said, the word here is that, they're going to go off with Adesanya. The fact is they still have a baby with Adesanya,
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we talked about was how Whitaker had fought, last July or something like that, and that we'd actually had 4 Adesanya fights since the last time we'd seen Whitaker, and that's unusual. Now, it's October right now. They're talking about March. Now he's settling into like a champion, every 6 months, and even that's an adjustment at this level. You know what I mean? So I would stress that let's go ahead, make the Costa fight, and go through with that plan and not get derailed. Put the little horse blinders on and do that, because You could start talking about all kinds of other things and things like that. And, best laid plans of mice and men. Just go ahead and take the next step, and don't make it like an alarming step, like move him in to fight John Jones, or even let too much of that rhetoric go down.
Yeah,
let him keep proving. That talk just is stupid, and it takes attention away from Costa and Adesanya is going to be a pretty damn good fight.
It is, and I'm telling you guys, I've been on the. You guys know I've been on the Adesanya hype train for a long time, but I can say genuinely from after this past Saturday, just looking at Twitter, looking at Facebook, looking at all the different pages that I'm subscribed to that are for like fan debating stuff, and listening to the MMA shows that I listen to while I drive and stuff. I have not heard somebody that is this high, like this much attention, this much universal praise for somebody in a long time. And I agree with you, Miguel. I think that he needs to keep this going. And I think that he doesn't need to slow down until, because if he keeps fighting at a frenetic pace every 4 months, keeps winning, defends his title a few times, when they finally get the Jones fight made, then take 6-7 months off and let that stew, let that fester, because he said that he's like, I'm going to be the first MMA fighter that makes $100 million. I don't need to go, because he was asking the lead up about boxing. He's like, I don't need to go to boxing. He's like, that's stupid. He's like, I'm tired of all this crossover stuff. He's like, I can do it right here. He's like, I have a better chance of doing it right here. He's like, I'm going to be the first MMA fighter to make $100 million. I don't know if that's going to be true. He's got a lot of work to do if he wants to get there. But the attention that he's gravitating right now is really unprecedented since Conor McGregor. And I want to send that over to you, Chad, because we haven't heard you talk about this yet. It was a great performance on Saturday, and now there's a lot of buzz about him and what his star power is globally and where he could go with what kind of star the UFC has here.
Okay, well, first of all, talking about the fight, Whitaker was just completely outclassed, and and basically what he did was he just exposed every flaw in Whitaker's arsenal. He exposed, and then he put him away, and he did it easily. I think he got hit where he actually got hit twice, where it was, he was kind of really in some kind of that could have been dangerous. And I mean, man, he danced around Whitaker the way Lomachenko does around everybody he fights in boxing. He literally is out there dancing while they're fighting. I see you could do a crossover if you'd have to get the weights right and everything, but kind of an MVP of Michael Venom Page. I know people are going to go completely crazy on that, but I see that as being.
I actually mentioned that fight like as one we'll never see, but I'd be excited for a Page versus. I know the weight classes are off, but Page could move up.
Yeah, but I mean that would be an interesting stylistic fight of two guys seeing them do that, and they're kind of trying to do the same thing with Jones. Where does that go? I don't know about that, but I agree with you guys. You keep this kid fighting and you keep him winning. And I don't think there's going to be a lot of people that are really going to beat him after seeing what he did to Whitaker. I don't see that guy out there that's going to go in there and absolutely take him apart and make it a 2.5 round fight and everybody goes, oh, now we understand. Now we know how to beat him, like they did Conor McGregor. Because for a while, Conor seemed undefeatable, but he was fighting the right people. And, I've always said that, good fighters make good fighters. Great managers make great fighters. And so, it's about matchmaking and management and managing his career and making sure he doesn't go off the rails like John Jones did. There's a lot to it, and he's young and he's ambitious and he's brash. And so let's see what happens in 2 fights before we even think about anything else. And let's keep him in his division. Let's keep him fighting the top 1, 2, 3. And let's stay there for the next 6 months at least.
I agree. And speaking of what we got going on with Conor McGregor, here's my next story.
Oh, boy.
Here's the tweet from Brett Okamoto of ESPN. This isn't fringe. Word is Conor McGregor wants to fight Frankie Edgar in his return. This fight was talked about for years when they were at featherweight. Why does Conor want it now? Frankie Edgar speculated. Full interview here, all this. I have heard Conor mention this, and his justification for this is he looks at Frankie Edgar as he's been a respectable athlete to him. He's not been somebody that's disrespected him. He's earned it. He's a legend of the sport. He looks at Frankie Edgar like he deserves it. We know that's not the real case. Should we be so hard on MMA fighters for this? Because we see this in boxing all the time where they have quote unquote tune-up fights. And that's what this would be. Jumping in with Justin Gaethje might be a little dangerous. Conor, I have my theory, and I don't know. I've been pretty spot on this year. I'll see if I get this one right. The UFC has a big ESPN network card coming up in December. There was a lot of potential. There was a lot of rumor that the reason the Usman-Covington fight wasn't going to happen on the Madison Square Garden card is because Diaz and Masvidal can carry that themselves, and they were going to move that to the network card. Well, that didn't happen. They're going to do that on UFC 245. Three title fights on that. My theory now is the UFC is offering to pay Conor McGregor some decent money for him to fight on ESPN Network in a pretty safe fight against Frankie Edgar. I think
why not?
I think it's going to garner a lot of attention. I think they'll probably give him $1 million to do it, and it's a safe fight. And I think it also, why would Frankie Edgar not want to take it? I mean, it's a payday. It's a big payday. And even if he loses the fight, he's almost 40 years old. The only thing that concerns me with this is, man, Frankie Edgar was finally talking about moving down to bantamweight, where he's been a natural bantamweight who's fought up in weight his whole career, and I'd like to see him fight Cejudo because I think he can win that.
I would too. Yeah, me too.
And I think that boosts his legacy into the top 10 best I've ever seen, because this is a man who was champion at lightweight, multiple time title contender at featherweight. If he could finally go down in his late 30s down to his natural weight class and show, hey, I could have been dominating this division for 10 years had I been in my natural weight class. I can still be the champion here. I think it'd be great for Frank Edgar's legacy. Fighting Conor McGregor, I think he loses that fight. I like Frankie Edgar, but if he wants to go get his money, no more power to him. What's your thoughts on this, Miguel?
It's a sad day when we're talking about Frankie Edgar potentially being a tune-up fight, right?
That's a good point.
It does look a little bit like that at this point, and that's not to disrespect Frankie, but I think that the window of opportunity for him and for this fight was a long time ago, and it's not there anymore. The problem with me and McGregor is, and I'm all right with it, like in boxing, and I'm all right with it in any sport if you're going to do a tune-up fight, but call it what it is. The problem to me is that he wants a tune-up fight, but won't take tune-up fight money. I can't pay you main event money for a risky fight when it's not a risky fight, And that's the thing is, that's the line that he pays. Now, does his drawing power and stuff warrant, The thing is to me, that stuff about drawing power and things like that, that's very fickle, and you kind of got to prove it, every once in a while. He's been out, he's coming off of losses, it's an open question to me that he's going to be able to draw. If he drew 10 million people, is he drawing 8 now? I don't know that he hasn't lost a little bit of that star power and stuff, and then on top of it, the extracurricular stuff outside the ring and stuff like that. So it's like, to me, it still seems like they're giving McGregor special treatment, and that's, I think, the real problem. The problem they're causing for themselves, because what it does is it sends a message. Masvidal was pretty clear in saying, they give him special treatment. The other guys all have to feel that. It's like there's rules, and then there's rules for McGregor.
Right.
All of that, I think, presents him a problem. All of that catering to McGregor and McGregor saying what he wants, and then, stuff like that. And I'm against it, And I agree with you. I think Edgar getting to 135 smart against Cejudo is probably the most interesting fight that they could do for Cejudo now. Cejudo's an idiot. They got to get the belt off that guy's hands as soon as possible, because he's just an embarrassment as far as I'm concerned. He's not smart. He's challenging women and stuff like that. Meanwhile, you got a guy like Edgar, a pedigree champion, that is sitting there and could make a legitimate fight, and it doesn't even come out of this guy's mouth. He's not. He's actually a notch below Joe Warren at this point in representing Olympic wrestlers making the move and not looking good. And they just don't look smart. And he's the biggest fool of all. He's talked himself out of a few paydays already.
On that note, Miguel, I got my theories about why Cejudo's kind of holding up two divisions. I mean, he's got a juggernaut that's already won a split decision at flyweight waiting for him, and Joseph Benavidez. Then when you look at that bantamweight division, you got the potential of Frankie, Petr Yan, Corey Sandhagen, Aljamain Sterling. He's got murderer's row when he finally starts fighting again. So we'll see what goes from there. Chad,
I agree with you, but I do want to mention that who the hell? The girl's name that he called out was embarrassed.
Both Valentina and Amanda.
Okay, yeah, but there we go. None of that murder. So that murderer's role led him to calling out women. That's a natural jump, and that's a leap you want your male champions to make. I can't fight any of these guys, so I'm going to call out some women.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Say judo. You're not going to sell one T-shirt with that stuff, bro. I'm not buying it.
He's definitely the king of cringe. But back on the note, Chad, I want to hear your thoughts about this Frankie Edgar, Conor McGregor bout. And real quick, before we go there, because I'm going to give you the floor for a minute. There's a lot to unpack here when it comes to what's going on with Conor McGregor. I have a theory, and I want to know your thought on this. It's looking more like, thank God, hopefully that we're going to get Khabib and Tony probably at the beginning of next year. But there's been a lot of also talk about GSP, and I think that's Khabib's father wants it. GSP wants it. GSP's coming out posting pics on Instagram saying he's on a 72-hour water fast, looks lean. Dana White saying he's walking around 10 pounds lower than Khabib is. I think they're looking at Tony and GSP, and I think Conor knows that. I think Conor's looking at possibly a tune-up fight with Frankie, fighting Gaethje, and hoping that after all the smoke clears, he can get back to a title fight after that. But just for the short term, though, Frankie versus Conor, and I liked your comment, Miguel. It is a sad day when Frankie Edgar is being talked about as a tune-up fight.
Okay, well, I'm just going to say that if you overlook Frankie Edgar, then he's going to have his hand held at the end of the fight. I'm not saying that Conor's going to go in there and lose to Frankie Edgar, but I will say this. If he overlooks Frankie Edgar and thinks he's going to go in there and not have to fight him, he's got another thing coming. Now, he's got a long left. I understand that. He fights long, but he's also got long, thin legs. That works in Frankie's favor if he can get him up against the cage. Frankie can wrap him. He can take him down. Frankie can do a lot of things to Conor that Conor is not very good at. Now, we know that Conor has trouble with wrestlers. We know that Conor has trouble when he gets on the ground and someone's on top of him exerting force and pressure. I'm not saying that Frankie can exert the kind of weight and force on Conor, but he can take him down if Conor's not smart. I don't think that would happen. I think Conor plays a really smart game. He probably puts him out in the third round, or maybe he even just takes the W and walks home with the decision. I don't know. I don't know if he can afford to do that or not. I think Conor really needs to come out. He needs to be the notorious one, and he needs to be big. But what he's doing right now is he's playing on the press as this, I'm humble, I'm mature, I've learned, I know the error of my ways, because like Miguel said, his stock's kind of fallen. And so, he knows he's got to come out and do something different. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. So, and as far as GSP and Khabib is concerned, I don't know. It's so insulting that, and until Ferguson is in there, I don't want anything else.
Yeah, I think that has to come. That takes preeminence over everything. I was talking more after Tony. It looks like that could be the super fight, and Khabib would earn it at that point. There was you got any other comments real quick, Miguel?
Like I said, I'm not enamored with the fight, and maybe McGregor against I don't know. I'm against Edgar. It reminds me of the Eddie Alvarez fight. And Alvarez and Frankie Edgar have some similarities in body type and reach and things like that they'd be facing there. And I'm afraid that, honestly, and I'm an Alvarez guy, but honestly, Frankie's probably a better boxer. Just, technique-wise, more unorthodox at least. But I wouldn't take that boxing into a fight, with McGregor. It's the length and stuff like that. You're right in his wheelhouse, and I think we'd see a repeat of the Alvarez fight. Look, keep in mind, I had high hopes for Eddie heading into that fight. That he was the right guy, gritty and stuff like that. Frankie brings all those X factors too, but I think that's the fight that I would look at, and I think that's the fight that McGregor thinks he can duplicate. You know what I mean? I think that's the issue is that Edgar is a very known quantity at this point. And aside from the wrestling gets harder as you're older too. It's harder to take a guy down. When you're not. And Frankie's been relying on his boxing for a long time in MMA. He hasn't really done a lot of grounding guys like that. So I just think it's a bad matchup. I'd much rather see them take. If they're going to do it, Khabib may not like it, but Khabib's the champion, and you can always alleviate things with, you throw the Ferguson fight and then just get it over with and to give me GSP and McGregor together. If you're going to do a sideshow, do the sideshow.
I mean, that would be a huge money grab for both of them. I don't think that'll happen. But when you bring up the Eddie Alvarez fight, that was going to be my final point. Love him or hate him when it comes to Conor McGregor. We've speculated all year who he's going to fight when he's coming back. At one point, it was Cerrone. Then we were talking about, everybody from Jose Aldo to Max Holloway to Dustin Poirier was mentioned just recently. Justin Gaethje's been involved in there. We talked about Tony Ferguson. We talked about all this stuff. The one thing that with that layoff does is it makes people forget sometimes, even people that have been following it. That Eddie Alvarez fight. Keep in mind, Eddie Alvarez went to war twice with Dustin Poirier. He knocked out Justin Gaethje. Eddie Alvarez is elite of the elite. Conor was fighting a lot of that fight with his hands behind his back. I mean, he literally was cracking Eddie. Conor McGregor is elite as they come, and I think that's a good indication of what we may have forgotten how good Conor is when we look at that fight, because that was impressive. Final headline of the show here. We got this being announced. And this goes back to Chad talking about the legends, and Miguel calls it the geriatric league. You got Fedor versus Rampage being announced for Tokyo, Japan, December 29th for Bellator. And when I see this, it makes me think I have to quickly get my phone out and look at my calendar. I'm like, man, this is 2008? Because this fight would have been good about 10 years ago. Yeah. And here we are. It is 2019. Both of these guys are well past their prime, but it's finally happening. When I look at this fight, I think Rampage is the favorite at this point because I think he still has a little more in the gas tank. I think he can still take a shot. We've seen from Fedor. Fedor cannot even get his chin clipped at all without going down these days. 10, 15 years ago, I'd have been calling Fedor all day. So that's my main problem as a hardcore fan of the sport. I see these fights, and this is no indication of their legacy. It's just them getting in there, getting their feet wet again, getting some money, and walking out. And but I'll watch, but I can't sit and say that I'm very excited about it. And I don't think even the average new casual fan that's come out, that's become an MMA fan in the past 5 years, they don't appreciate either one of these guys. They don't know anything about them. And then the hardcore fans are looking at this just like we are, that's been champions for 10, 15 years. Like, okay, come on, man. Can we see more Douglas Limas versus Roy McDonald's? Do we really got to keep seeing these rehashed old fights that nobody cares about anymore? I mean, what's next? Is Tito going to fight Fedor? What's your thoughts on this, Chad?
Well, Tito did announce that he's going to be fighting in Mexico City, by the way.
Yeah, I seen that.
So, there's that too.
That's not even worthy of a headline on our show. So.
No, I don't. It's just so ridiculous. Listening to him talk about it was awful.
I'm going to do a pro wrestling podcast about it.
Here's the thing. if I got to pick a guy, I'm picking the Emperor. I think Fedor's got enough tricks up his sleeve to wear Rampage down and probably submit him. I don't think he'll knock him out. I guess he could. But like you said, man, it's really hard to care about this at this point. We want to see these guys on a mantle. We want to see them in a Hall of Fame, and we want to see them with their gold jackets or whatever, and we want to see them be done. It's so hard to watch a fighter that was a superhero to me end up this way where they're fighting for their rent. And I'm not saying that Fedor's doing that, because he's not, but I'm not sure that Rampage isn't. And man, I don't like it. I don't want to see it, and I probably won't even watch it, to be fair.
Do you agree with this, Miguel?
Yeah, no, I think that, Bellator's already shown a predilection to go this way and do this type of fight and stuff like that. And I think that the real problem that we're going to have here at some point, maybe it's not going to be this fight, but at some point you're kind of dancing with the devil. And, it happened on an Oscar De La Hoya promoted MMA show, but Tito versus Chuck was just there comes a point where it's not just neutral. It's not just like hardcores don't like the fight. There comes a time where you're literally putting a black eye on the sport in general. Keep in mind that Chuck Liddell 10 years ago, when he retired the first time, really looked like he shouldn't be fighting anymore at that point.
Yep.
So when you're coming in with a guy now Fedor hasn't looked at that level of bad yet, but he has been chinny. And now you're putting him in against a hard hitter. Power really is the one thing you don't lose, right? Maybe accuracy and speed, right? But if Quinn hits him, it's gonna hurt. So I think you're really dancing with what they're not paying attention to here is, that there's a risk reward, and the risk is really to me it's not a risk I take. It's not a risk I take to put two older men into the ring. Because we're going to do our first show in Tokyo, and because they both have name recognition there. That's, money is money, money's business and stuff like that. But at some point, you keep, going to that well often enough, you're going to get more than just, man, that fight sucked.
I'm wondering if they made this deal with Ryzen where they agreed to share a champion basically with Kyoji Horiguchi. He should be headlining this show. Kyoji Horiguchi is one of the best fighters in the world, and the people down there in ATT are saying that he's the best fighter they've ever worked with under 145 pounds, and he's a champion at bantamweight in both Ryzen and in Bellator. So I wonder if this is a conflict of scheduling when it comes to Ryzen and Bellator. I don't know. Maybe he is going to be on this card as the co-main event. I'm not sure what's going on with that, but
it's precisely the problem you pointed out. Precisely, here they have a guy who they could say Bellator champion, headlining Tokyo, home, from Japan, and they bring in Fedor.
Huge star too. Huge star. And me and Amanda, since you guys talked about this, me and Amanda had the conversation once about, okay, and this is going to open up a can of worms. It needs to be. We've been needing to have this conversation for a while. At what point, who becomes liable for exploitation, or is there exploitation? Do we go straight on freedom when it comes to these individual contractors, aka fighters, getting in a ring and signing on the dotted line and fighting? Do we say that is their right? If somebody will license them, they can get in there. And when we look at these fighters, these are two legends of the sport. They should not be denied a license to fight. I don't get that vibe that you guys think that. And if that's the case, who's liable for potential exploitation accusations? Is it the commission? Is it the promotion? Who is responsible for allowing? Because Amanda said something about, well, their families need to step in. I was like, I have dealt with that personally. That does not always work.
Nope.
Denying them a license, saying it's illegal to get in there, would be one thing. But when do you pull the plug? I mean, when do you say that you've had enough, you can't fight? I mean, it can't be done by age. Look at Mark Hunt, look at DC, look at Randy Couture. It can't be done by losing streaks because we've seen people come back from losing streaks. I think BJ Penn, obviously, when you've got clear – you're getting in trouble outside the cage. You're getting knocked out in street fights. You're on an 8-fight losing streak. You're having accusations of beating your wife and stuff. Yeah, at that point, get him some mental help and get him out of the cage. Chuck Liddell, clear CTE. He should not have been given a license, and I believe there should be some exploitation charges. They're exploiting this. I mean, if we got exploitation laws in other countries for slave labor and all this kind of stuff, we have standards here on, how old you're able to work. Giving him a license to go fight at 48 years old with massive brain damage, I mean, that's not exploitation to make a little bit of money. I mean, what's your thoughts on this, Chad? Where do we draw the line? Who's liable? And how do we define this?
Okay, in neurology, we have this thing called a functional MRI, and that's where we draw the line. We look at the brain, and we do a functional MRI. We do reflex testing. We do strength testing. We do speed testing. All of these things, and if they can't pass it, look, okay, you haven't been in the ring for X amount of time. You lost this many fights in a row to knockout or suspect, and you're this age. There's more expected of you, which should go down to the commission. Period.
Well, I was about to ask about that, Chad, because we've known that people like Max Holloway have had some issues, but yeah, he's come back and looked fantastic this year in some of his fights, and even went through a war with Dustin Poirier at a higher weight class.
Yeah.
And what if Chuck Liddell could have passed his physicals? I'm sure he did have to have a physical to fight. What do they say then? I mean, is it still not just common sense that, okay, maybe you're still passing our requirements, but it cannot be healthy for you to go get in there and get starched again?
Well, I just think that the requirements need to be much more strict and stringent, and they need to toe that line very seriously, or they're going to run into a situation where they are sued and they do become liable for that kind of stuff, and as well they should. That's what a commission's for. That's what they're supposed to do. That's what a ring doctor's for. That's what doctors in advance are for. Everybody's supposed to check this out. And if they can't pass any of those tests, it's a no-go. It's just no license.
What do you think, Miguel?
I think you're going to know the answer right away as soon as I say it. We have a very simple point that if we could decide correctly, this would be a moot point. And that is very simple. What's more important, the dollar or the safety of the fighters?
There you go.
And if it's the safety of the fighters, then we have to act according to that, which means cancel fights, fights that want to be made that can't be made, fights that, you can't play shenanigans like, we'll just move it to another state and we'll do the fight there and stuff like that. Real policing. The commissions are, a 20th century construct that are completely useless, basically on every level that they're supposed to be useful for.
Yeah.
So in other words, they fill out paperwork, and the only use the commissions have now is that there's a bureaucracy in place so that when a fighter actually dies, there's, the sport survives basically, and it doesn't get banned, which was a very real, possibility pre-commissions, in boxing, and that's the way that works. And that's the only purpose they serve. Because the bottom line to me is the commission has a doctor. The doctor either has his own practice. I doubt very much that the commissions are paying a salary for a full-time doctor to be a commissioned doctor. So these guys are getting fees on a per-show basis and reviewing paperwork that's coming in from whatever fighters are bringing their paperwork in or undergoing exams. They're live at the show and they're reviewing paperwork. Chad touched upon the neurology of it, which, reflexes and things like that. There's no real, as I see it, there's no real, if you had to have an MRI exam on file, if I'm not mistaken, the MRI has to be good for 3 years. So if you got your MRI 2.5 years ago, you fought 10 times since, your MRI is completely different.
Yeah.
You know, but it's not required for that next fight. I think that the neurology of it, that the commissions need to start there. They need to really be heavy on doctors and medicine, and use that as the basis to cancel fights, not, you know, whether the promoter I spent money on posters, you know, or I've got a world title fight I've been advertising on, you know, so that overrides things, and the commission's always like seeing what they can do or whatever it is. All that stuff needs to go away. The bottom line to me is with a proper medical examining on the neurology end, and this may not be an easy call, but I think you're heading down this path if you're going to do it right. I think I'm in the neighborhood here. Is when an athlete's 25, if you have an MRI there, by the time he's 35, there should be some comparable deterioration and difference in his speed and his ability to move and stuff like that. This is how Donald Cerrone gets dropped, and he gets up, looks at his opponent in the face, and freezes here because his neurology is no longer responding in a way, shape, or form that a normal neurology is. It's already been damaged. And unless we're looking at some of that deterioration, like now, after 10 years off, still Chuck Liddell, look, man, you're at 40% of what you were. And does that paperwork exist that you can even do the comparison now? No, I don't think so, you know? And those are the problems, is that is a medical situation. The medical situation must override all things. Now, you're talking about prime athletes, so 99% of the time, everything's going to go right. And you're going to be okay, right? But now, once you start to see this deterioration in this stuff, you've got to be able to call upon it and say, look, you're not what you once were. And that's not going to get better, you know, with aging and stuff like that. And there's no real doctor relationship, you know. In fact, you've got the commission doctor, and rather than him be the doctor worried about the safety of every athlete on the show, and you probably need more than one doctor, what you have is the fighters with their own doctors, probably bringing their own paperwork just to be reviewed by this guy. Now, this guy's facing 30 pieces of paperwork and stuff like that. How do you actually have a relationship with where you're actually worried about this guy and be like, man, you know, you're in Vegas, I've been watching your fights for 3 years, or I've been reviewing the paperwork for your fights for the last 3 years and the neurologist's report and stuff like that. And you're slower, you're slurring words, you know, those are all big flags. But on the neurology end, I think that's the key there. And those guys have to be able to make the call and say law, you know. It's like, no, you're not only are you not getting licensed, you're done for life. You're never getting licensed. This is a permanent lifetime ban, a lifetime requirement. After Chuck Liddell's knockouts, where Dana White was begging for him not to fight.
The same with BJ Penn.
The BJ one is a little weirder, but with Chuck, it was like he was friends and he wanted him to retire, but they kept putting him out there. You know what I mean? It's
McGill,
like,
I've been trying to jump in because this has been in the news this week. Well, no, I'm just like I'm going with your point here. This is clearly something's broken because we've had a video of Michael Bisping popping out his fake eye and telling Joe Rogan I was fighting with that. How did they miss that? How did they miss this in the pre-fight inspections of this guy? That this guy had a prosthetic eye.
Yeah, that's one of those things where, again, a doctor, they have no relationship. It's actually adversarial with like, you know, the fighter has his doctors and his people are taking care of stuff. And, you know, either if, you know, maybe some of them are on steroids, their doctor knows, and they're still trying to fool another doctor, get away with it and stuff like that. That whole thing reeks of not really, the core thing is the safety of the fighters, right? And it reminds me of
Supposed to be
a dumb subject, you know, but there's a pro wrestler named John Moxley that did a great promo where he said, you know, I'm not the type of guy that's necessarily worried about the safety of the fighters. So what do we do? We put this guy in charge. This guy's in charge because nobody's worried about the safety of the fighters. They're worried about completing the paperwork, doing the bureaucratic thing, and staying as clean as possible and not causing any trouble or waves, which also includes canceling fights. You don't want to get a reputation as being a commission that cancels fights because Eddie Hearn in England isn't going to bring his show to your state if there's the potential you're going to cancel his title fights and things. So it's all a business.
That's a great point. It's exploitation, and it's exactly what I'm saying. You got any last words on this, Chad?
No, other than we just need to pay attention to the neurological health of the fighter, the entire health, but neurologically, obviously, that's, when you talk about fighting, when you talk about any kind of contact sports, that's got to be number one. And if it's not, then what's the point of even having a commission in the first place? It's a joke. So, all I've got to say about it is that we have the tools to do it. It's not that expensive, and each state can even go through and buy or rent or whatever an MRI. There are tons and tons of neuropsychologists that can do the testing, and they can do it very cheaply. Put these into here, go into here. I mean, a lot of factory jobs you go into, you have to be able to pass that same test, but you don't have to pass that test to get in and get punched in the face. I don't know. It all sounds like, like Miguel said, it's about money.
Yeah.
It's about getting it done. So that's all I've got.
Well, with that, Miguel, Chad, it was great to have you guys together with me this time. It was great to have all three of us on here. We covered a lot, went about an hour and a half long. Miguel, you got anything you want to close with before I sign us off?
No, I'm excited. It is a very, very busy calendar weekend for fights. So what you got to do is you got to check the local listings, prioritize, and try to check them all out. Now they got these devices where you can probably catch all the fights and stuff. So you're going to be busy this weekend. To me, I'm more looking forward to next week. But the Joanna fight, we'll see if it happens. I think it definitely is an issue that everybody on the MMA side should have their antennas up on this Joanna fight. It'll probably work out that we will probably get the fight, and there'll probably be, some type of repercussions. People talk and they'll be outraged, and then 2-3 days we'll be right back to the drawing board. Unless there's a tragedy, and if there's a tragedy, it shouldn't have to come to that for people to actually have conversations and talk about revamping it. The weight cutting thing, once again now, is actually the same, and we can close on this, Dev, or I'll hand it back to you. But once again now, the weight cutting thing is absolutely the same issue. You've got people trying to make a weight, and you've got doctors in the commission checking it in an adversarial role where they either cancel fights, you got 2 hours to do it, you got this, you can't do an IV, which will help you afterwards. It's an adversarial relationship. There's nothing in there that they're actually trying to take care of the health of the fighter. They're just trying to follow rules.
Yep.
And with that, you brought up the schedule. I know that the PFL is on ESPN2 and ESPN Plus Friday night. The Bellator card is Saturday as well on the Zone. UFC on ESPN Plus 19, Joanna versus Waterson, hopefully, is Saturday night on the Zone. And the One Championship will be on TNT and the Bleacher Report live app, and that will be Saturday as well. So this is a busy week in the world of mixed martial arts. We've done our best to cover all of it that we can. Chad, it was good for you to join us this week. You want to tell everybody to subscribe to us and give some words to our audience that's going to potentially watch this?
Don't forget to subscribe. Go to the YouTube channel, go to Facebook, whatever you want to do, share, tell everybody about it. And as soon as this is up on our Facebook page or on our YouTube page, I'll get everything boosted and we'll get rolling on it. So, we appreciate everybody. Thank you for stopping by. It's been great seeing you guys again.
And where can we go to get the latest updates on the soda?
That will be coming up again here pretty soon. We're planning on doing a Simply Soda or a Soda Pop and Dadilac Speed Show, and we'll do that. We'll have that. It's probably going to be a week and a half. He's got a super busy schedule. We've been in a lot of hospitals lately, so things are going well.
Yeah, we haven't got an update on that in a while, so that's usually one of our hottest programs that we have. But Miguel Adorati, Chad Wagner, thanks for joining me, and that's been a CRP News Roundup. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. Big card. We gave you all the listings that is listed on MMAJunkie.com right now. So I'll talk to you next time. We'll recap this everything on Sunday night. Okay, guys.
You bet. Thanks, Devin. Thanks, Miguel.
Thanks, guys.